Hello everyone. There comes a fateful moment when the shadows of the past refuse to stay hidden. The truth about Tu Diem's painful life with her ex-husband has surfaced. And it shook not only her fragile heart, but also the judgmental eyes of Toan's mother. Questions rise like storms. Was Tu Diem truly a victim of cruel fate? Or is she forever a sinner in the eyes of those who refuse to understand her pain? And in that tense silence, CEO Toan, the man who once vowed to protect her, said nothing. His silence cut deeper than any word, leaving Diem standing between hope and despair. Is this the moment that defines love's endurance, or the cruel reminder that the past can still destroy the present? The storm that Tu Diem thought she had escaped suddenly returned, stronger and sharper than ever. It came not in the form of hunger, cold nights, or cruel fate, but through whispers of the past, whispers that reached the ears of Toan's mother. The truth about Diem's broken marriage, about the humiliation and betrayal she had endured, was now exposed before a woman who valued family honor above all things. Madame Ly Toan's mother sat in silence for a long time when she first heard the story. Her face revealed nothing, but her eyes carried a storm. She invited Diem into the living room, the air heavy, each second stretching like an eternity. Diem stood there, her hands trembling, her heart pounding as if it might leap out of her chest. She knew this confrontation was inevitable, but she was not prepared for the weight of judgment in those eyes. "So, this is the truth you hid." Madame Ly's voice was calm but cold, slicing through the silence. "You left your husband's home, you carried shame with you, and now you stand here, under my roof, seeking my son's protection." Diem's lips quivered. She wanted to speak, to explain that she was not the sinner people painted her to be. She wanted to cry out that she had suffered not because she was guilty, but because she was the victim of cruelty. But words tangled in her throat. She lowered her eyes, afraid of the storm that might follow if she spoke too much. Toan sat nearby, listening. His silence was not indifference, but an ache he could not translate into words. He knew Diem's pain. He believed in her innocence, yet he also understood the fragile bond between him and his mother. To defend Diem too quickly would mean confronting the woman who had given him life, a woman he still respected deeply. So, for the first time, Toan chose silence. His fists clenched under the table, his heart torn between love and duty. Madame Ly rose slowly, her gaze still fixed on Diem. "Do you think suffering makes you pure? Or does your past stain everything you touch?" Her words fell like stones. "A woman carries her past wherever she goes, Diem. And in my eyes, you are no different. Victim or sinner, what does it matter, when the shadow remains?" Diem's tears finally escaped, sliding down her cheeks. She whispered, barely audible, "I never wanted to bring shame here. I only wanted a chance to live." The room fell silent once more. Toan did not move. His silence felt like a wall strong enough to keep peace for now, but fragile enough to collapse at any moment. The silence in the room was unbearable. Tu Diem lowered her eyes, her hands trembling as if they could no longer carry the weight of her past. She could feel the piercing gaze of Toan's mother, sharp as knives, stripping her of dignity. Every whispered judgment from the past seemed to echo once more, unworthy, shameless, ruined. Toan sat still, his face unreadable. His silence was not agreement, nor was it defense. It was something deeper, an inner battle no one else could see. "Do you think love erases shame?" Toan's mother's voice cracked with bitterness. "A woman who once belonged to another man, abandoned by him, carrying scars of scandal, can she ever truly belong to you?" Tu Diem's heart sank. The truth of her past was not a story of sin, but of survival betrayal. Forced marriage, cruelty, and the suffocating chains of a family that treated her like property. But in the eyes of society, in the eyes of a proud mother, truth was never enough. People preferred judgment over compassion. Finally, Tu Diem found her voice, fragile but steady. I am not asking for forgiveness, because I have done nothing wrong except endure. I am not asking for approval, because my worth cannot be measured by what others think of me. I only ask for one thing: do not mistake my suffering for sin. The room fell into a thick silence. Toan's mother froze, her stern expression flickering with something unspoken hesitation, perhaps even doubt. For the first time, she saw not a sinner before her, but a woman who had survived storms she could never imagine. Toan remained silent still, but this time, his silence was no longer heavy. It was steady, protective, like a shield unseen but deeply felt. And Tu Diem, though judged again, stood taller than she ever had before. The silence in the room stretched long, like a heavy curtain that no one dared to pull aside. Tu Diem lowered her eyes, her fingers trembling slightly, as she clutched the hem of her dress. She had endured accusations all her life, but hearing them here in Toan's home, in front of his mother, cut deeper than any wound. Madame Lan's voice softened for a moment, though her gaze stayed sharp. Do you understand what it means, Diem? A woman who once lived in disgrace cannot so easily walk into my son's life. People talk. Society judges. My son's future, his name, his business, everything could be tainted. Diem's throat tightened. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. Madam, I never chose that life. I was forced, trapped in a cage of cruelty. I ran, I fought, I survived. Does survival make me guilty? If so, then yes, I am guilty in the eyes of the world. But I never betrayed anyone. I only wished for freedom. Her words lingered in the air, fragile yet piercing. Toan, who had remained silent all this time, shifted slightly but still said nothing. His silence was not indifference, it was torment. He was torn between his mother's fierce love and the truth glowing in Diem's wounded eyes. Finally, Madame Lan sighed heavily, her sternness wavering. I want to believe you, Diem, but trust is not given lightly. You will need to prove that you are not the shadow of your past. Diem nodded, tears pressing at the corner of her eyes. She had no defense left, only the quiet dignity of someone who had suffered yet refused to collapse. Toan's silence remained, but his hand almost unconsciously moved across the table, resting close to hers, not touching, yet close enough for her to feel his unspoken answer. I have not abandoned you. The storm had not ended. It had only begun. Toan's silence stretched longer than anyone expected. His mother's sharp words echoed in the living room, piercing through the fragile calm that Diem had been holding on to. Do you see, Toan? His mother insisted, her tone trembling between anger and disappointment. This woman comes from shadows, from disgrace. Do you really think someone like her can stand beside you, the heir to our family name? Diem lowered her gaze, her fingers tightly gripping the edge of her dress, as if it were the last thread keeping her from collapsing. She wanted to explain, to tell the truth, that the marriage with her ex-husband was not love, but a cruel prison where she had been traded like an object. But every time she tried to speak, her throat closed, weighed down by years of humiliation. Toan finally lifted his head. His voice, quiet but steady, cut through the tension. Mother, you see her as a sinner. I see her as someone who suffered more than any of us could imagine. The room went silent. His mother's eyes widened in disbelief, almost as if Toan had chosen a stranger over blood. But Toan didn't look away. His gaze was fixed on Diem, not with pity, but with a quiet strength. I don't need a woman with a spotless past, he continued. I need someone who is true. And Diem, despite everything, has never been anything but genuine. Diem's heart trembled. For so long, she had been judged, condemned, and silenced. Yet, in that moment, Toan's words wrapped around her like a shield, something she had never known before: unconditional defense. But his mother's anger did not fade. Instead, her voice cracked, filled with wounded pride. So you would throw away your name, your family's honor, for her? Toan closed his eyes briefly, as if the weight of that choice pressed heavily on him. Then he answered softly, if honor means turning away from the truth, and from love, then yes, I would. In life, the past often follows us like a shadow, sometimes quietly and sometimes fiercely, ready to be judged by others who may not know the whole truth. The story of Tu Diem reflects this painful reality. She was judged harshly by Toan's mother, not for who she truly was in the present, but for the scars of her past with her ex-husband. Every word of accusation felt like a chain that tried to tie her down, reminding her that society is quick to condemn, but slow to understand. Yet, in this painful moment, an important lesson emerges. A person's worth should never be measured solely by their past, but by their courage to rise and live differently in the present. Tu Diem carried wounds, but she also carried resilience, kindness, and the will to survive despite being abandoned, betrayed, and mistreated. She was not perfect, but she was human, deserving of compassion rather than judgment. Toan's silence, though misunderstood, also teaches us something vital. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is a space where love quietly chooses understanding over argument, patience over pride. While his mother's words were sharp, Toan's restraint was his way of protecting Tu Diem from further humiliation. His silence held more love than any defense spoken in anger. From this, we learn that true love is not blind. It sees flaws and pain, yet still chooses to stay. True compassion looks beyond the mistakes of the past and asks instead, who is this person now? What kind of life are they fighting to create? In the end, the greatest lesson is clear. Every human being deserves a chance to be more than their past. To judge without understanding is easy. But to forgive and support someone in their journey of healing, that is the highest form of love.